I never thought I'd be that guy. The one scouring through late-night forums, obsessing over relationship advice columns, trying to convince himself that the gut-wrenching feelings gnawing away at his insides were just paranoia. But here I am. My wife, Ashley, and I have been married for 9 years. She's smart, funny, and driven. Everything I ever wanted in a partner. At least that's what I used to think. Lately, things between us have felt off. It's hard to pinpoint when it started, but the little things began to pile up. First, there was the sudden increase in work emergencies. She'd text me at 9 p.m., claiming she had to stay late at the office or attend an impromptu client dinner. She works in marketing, so these excuses were believable at first. Then there were the secretive phone calls. Whenever I walked into the room, her voice would drop, and she'd end the call abruptly. "Just catching up with Kelly," she'd say. Kelly, her best friend, who always seemed to have impeccable timing. The real tipping point, though, came 3 weeks ago. Ashley's demeanor changed completely. She became defensive about her phone, snapping at me if I so much as glanced at the screen when it buzzed. She'd started wearing makeup every day, even on weekends when we barely left the house. And she'd bought lingerie that I'd never seen her wear. My mind was swirling with possibilities, each more damning than the last. I wanted to believe it was all in my head, that the woman I'd loved for nearly a decade would never betray me. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. I decided to test the waters last night. As she got ready for an important dinner with a client, I casually asked, "Which client is this again?" She paused, her eyeliner pencil freezing mid-swipe. "Oh, Jakob. From the Wilco account." I nodded, keeping my face neutral. "Didn't you say Wilco canceled their contract last month?" Her reflection in the mirror stiffened. "No, they're still around. You must be mixing it up." Her laugh sounded forced, the kind that begs not to be questioned further. I let it go, but that interaction planted a seed of determination. Something wasn't adding up. When she left that evening, I waited for her car to disappear down the street. Then I did something I never thought I'd do. I rummaged through her things. Her laptop was password protected, but her iPad wasn't. A wave of guilt washed over me as I unlocked it, but it quickly dissolved when I saw the text messages. At the top of her most recent chats was a contact saved under M. I clicked on it and my stomach dropped. "M. Missing you already. Can't wait to see you tonight." Ashley's reply, "Me too. I'll wear what you like. Be there at 8. I felt like the floor had crumbled beneath me. My hands shook as I scrolled further. The messages were intimate, detailed, disgusting. But then, I saw something that made my blood turn to ice. One of M's earlier messages read, "Your mom almost caught us last time. We need to be more careful." Her mom? What the hell was going on? Before I could process the implications, I heard her car pull into the driveway. My heart raced as I scrambled to put everything back in its place. I couldn't confront her, not yet. I needed to know more, and I was going to find out. I barely slept that night. The image of Ashley's messages replayed in my mind like a haunting movie I couldn't pause. The cryptic mention of her mom left me spiraling. It wasn't just that she was cheating. That much was already clear. It was the who. The next morning, Ashley acted as if nothing had happened. She hummed in the kitchen while making coffee, occasionally glancing at me with her usual soft smile. The same smile that now felt like a knife in my chest. I forced myself to smile back, pretending everything was fine. "I was thinking we could do dinner at my mom's this weekend," Ashley said casually, sipping her coffee. I nearly choked on mine. "Your mom's? Why?" She shrugged. "Just thought it'd be nice. We haven't seen her in a while." A pit formed in my stomach. Was this her idea of keeping up appearances? "Yeah, sure. Sounds good." I lied, trying not to let my voice waver. The rest of the day was a blur. At work, I couldn't focus. The betrayal was a storm in my mind, but the mention of her mom had turned it into a hurricane. I kept replaying the texts in my head. What did they mean? Who was M? That evening, when Ashley left for another late meeting, I finally decided to dig deeper. I logged into our shared phone plan, something I'd never had a reason to do before. I pulled up her call and text logs, searching for the number behind M. It didn't take long to find. What hit me next was like a sledgehammer to the chest. The number wasn't just familiar. It was one I'd dialed dozens of times myself. It belonged to her stepfather, Mark. My mind went blank. For a moment, I sat there, staring at the screen, unable to comprehend what I was seeing. Mark, the man who'd been in her life since she was a teenager. The man who always seemed so kind, so supportive of her, of us. I told myself it had to be a mistake. Maybe the texts were meant for someone else. Maybe the number was being spoofed. No, I couldn't keep making excuses. I needed proof. I downloaded an app that allowed me to track phone locations through our shared plan. It felt invasive, wrong even, but my hands moved with a determination that overrode my conscience. The app showed her phone's location in real time. She wasn't at work. She wasn't anywhere near the office she claimed to be heading to. She was at a hotel. I stared at the map, the blinking dot mocking me with its certainty. I had half a mind to drive there, to catch them red-handed. But I stopped myself. I needed more than a confrontation. I needed to expose the truth. Fully, publicly, and irrevocably. That's when I remembered the surveillance camera I'd installed in our living room last year. It wasn't there to spy on Ashley. It had been my attempt to add security to the house after a string of burglaries in our neighborhood. But now it might serve a different purpose. I logged into the camera's cloud storage and scrolled through the footage from the past week. Most of it was mundane. Ashley leaving for work, me coming home late, the usual monotony of domestic life. But then I found something that made my blood run cold. It was 2 nights ago. Ashley had come home late, just like she'd said she would. Only, she wasn't alone. Mark was with her. In the grainy footage, I watched as they stood in the kitchen. He was far too close to her, his hand brushing her back as she leaned against the counter. They were laughing, their voices faint but audible. Then he kissed her. It wasn't a quick, familial peck on the cheek. It was deliberate, lingering, passionate. I shut the laptop, my chest heaving with rage. This wasn't just an affair. This was something darker, something sick. And they thought they could get away with it. They had no idea what was coming. After watching the footage, I sat in the dark for what felt like hours. My rage simmered just beneath the surface, but I forced myself to stay calm. Anger alone wouldn't fix this. I needed to think clearly, to plan. Ashley didn't come home until nearly midnight. I lay in bed, pretending to be asleep, as she crept into the room. She slid under the covers without a word, her back turned to me. The scent of her perfume lingered, stronger than usual, as if she'd reapplied it before coming home. I wanted to confront her right then, to throw the covers off and demand answers. But I bit my tongue. If I acted too soon, I'd risk losing the upper hand. The next day, I took a personal day from work and started my real investigation. I scoured through our financial records, looking for any suspicious transactions. Sure enough, there were charges for hotels, dinners, and even gifts, all things Ashley had never mentioned. One charge stood out, a jewelry store receipt for a diamond bracelet. Ashley never wore it, which meant it wasn't for her, or at least that's what I thought. But as I dug deeper, I found an old photo on her phone of her wearing the bracelet at a dinner party months ago. Mark was in the background, smiling like he owned the world. The pieces were falling into place, but I needed more. I called her mother, Diane, under the pretense of catching up. Diane adored Ashley and had always treated me like a son. As we chatted, I casually asked if Mark had been traveling for work recently. "Oh no," Diane replied. "He hasn't traveled for months. He's been working from home." The lie confirmed it. Ashley's work dinners were with Mark. Before hanging up, Diane added, "You should come by soon. We haven't seen you two in ages. Maybe this weekend." I clenched my jaw, my thoughts racing. If Ashley was still planning to drag me to her mom's house, that meant she and Mark weren't even trying to keep things low-key. "Yeah, maybe," I said, forcing a casual tone. "Let me check with Ashley." After hanging up, I knew what I had to do. It was time to set the trap. I spent the afternoon gathering every piece of evidence I could. I downloaded the camera footage, compiled the text messages, and saved screenshots of the financial transactions. I even called a private investigator to get additional documentation, just to make sure I didn't miss anything. By the end of the day, I had a complete dossier of their betrayal. That evening, Ashley came home as if nothing had changed. She kissed me on the cheek, asked how my day was, and curled up on the couch with her laptop. The sight of her pretending to be the perfect wife made my stomach churn. "What's for dinner?" she asked casually. "I was thinking we could grab takeout," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Maybe Chinese?" Her eyes lit up. "Sounds good. I'll order." As she reached for her phone, I felt a grim satisfaction. Let her enjoy the moment. Let her think everything was fine. Because in a few days, her entire world was going to come crashing down. The next morning, I woke up with a renewed sense of purpose. It was no longer just about catching them. It was about making sure they felt every ounce of betrayal I had endured. Ashley's lies and Mark's audacity wouldn't go unanswered. When she left for work, I immediately got to planning. My first call was to Diane, Ashley's mother. "Hey, Diane," I said, doing my best to sound upbeat. "Ashley mentioned dinner at your place this weekend. Are we still on?" Diane's voice brightened. "Of course. Saturday evening? I'll make her favorite casserole." "Perfect," I replied. "I'll bring a surprise for dessert." As we hung up, I couldn't help but smirk. If Ashley and Mark wanted to play their sick little game, they were about to learn the hard way that I was 2 steps ahead. The next step was ensuring the evidence was airtight. I met with the private investigator I'd hired, a grizzled man named Victor who looked like he'd seen it all. I handed him the files I'd compiled and told him I needed more. Clear photos, timestamps, and any additional proof he could gather. Victor leaned back in his chair, studying me. "This isn't just about catching them, is it?" "No," I said flatly. "It's about making them pay." Victor nodded, a hint of a smile playing on his lips. "I'll get you what you need. Just be ready for the fallout." By Friday evening, Victor delivered. He handed me a thick envelope filled with photos. Ashley and Mark meeting at hotels, sharing intimate moments, and even a damning shot of Mark slipping into our house while I was at work. "This enough for you?" Victor asked. "More than enough," I said, gripping the envelope tightly. That night, I prepared everything. The evidence was sorted into folders. One for Diane, one for Ashley, and one for Mark. I made copies of everything and uploaded it to a secure cloud, ensuring it couldn't be destroyed or lost. Then came the hardest part, keeping calm around Ashley. She came home late again, claiming she'd been working on a new campaign. I bit my tongue, forcing myself to act as if I believed her. "You're working so hard lately," I said, handing her a glass of wine. She smiled, looking genuinely touched. "Thanks for understanding. It's just a busy season, you know?" I nodded, watching her sip the wine. She had no idea I was counting down the hours until her charade came crashing down. Saturday arrived, and the tension in my chest was almost unbearable. Ashley spent the afternoon getting ready, curling her hair and carefully choosing her outfit. "You're really going all out," I said, keeping my tone light. "Well, it's Mom's house," she replied with a laugh. "Gotta look good for family." I clenched my jaw to keep from snapping back. Family? The irony was almost too much to bear. At 6 o'clock, we arrived at Diane's house. The familiar smell of her cooking wafted through the air as we stepped inside. Diane greeted us with hugs, oblivious to the storm brewing beneath the surface. Mark was already there, sitting casually in the living room. He grinned when he saw us, but his smile faltered slightly when our eyes met. He knew. We sat down for dinner, and I forced myself to make small talk, even as my heart pounded in my chest. Ashley laughed and joked with Diane, while Mark avoided looking at me. When dessert came, I stood up and cleared my throat. "I brought a little something to share," I said, pulling out the folders. Ashley furrowed her brow. "What's that?" "Just some things I thought the family should see," I said, my voice steady. Diane looked confused. Mark stiffened in his seat. Ashley froze. I handed Diane the first folder and watched as her face paled. What is this?" she stammered. "It's the truth," I said, locking eyes with Mark. "The truth about Ashley. And you." The room fell into a deafening silence. Diane's hands trembled as she flipped through the folder. Her confused expression quickly turned to horror. Photos of Ashley and Mark at a hotel, their arms around each other, laughing, kissing. Screenshots of their explicit text messages. Bank statements showing Mark's payments for hotel rooms and gifts. Ashley stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "What the hell is this?" she demanded, her voice shaking. Mark's face turned an ashen gray, and he slumped in his chair, eyes darting to Diane, then to me. "Diane, let me explain." "Explain what?" Diane hissed, her voice trembling with barely restrained rage. "Explain why there are photos of you and my daughter sneaking around like animals?" Ashley turned on me, her voice rising. "You went through my stuff? Spied on me? How dare you? How dare I?" I snapped, slamming my hand on the table. "How dare you, Ashley? You've been sneaking around with your stepfather, lying to my face every day. Do you even understand what you've done?" Diane pushed back from the table, standing so abruptly her glass of wine tipped over, staining the white tablecloth a deep red. "Mark, tell me this isn't true," she whispered, her voice breaking. Mark opened his mouth, but no words came out. His silence was the final confirmation. Ashley stepped forward, her face flushed with panic. "Mom, it's not what it looks like." "Not what it looks like?" Diane shrieked, throwing the folder onto the table. "You've been sleeping with my husband, Ashley. My husband. What could it possibly be other than what it looks like?" The room erupted into chaos. Diane yelled, Ashley screamed back, and Mark sat frozen, his head in his hands. I stood silently, watching the scene unfold, a cold satisfaction settling over me. They deserved this. "You planned this?" Ashley accused, pointing a shaking finger at me. "You wanted to humiliate me." "No, Ashley," I said coldly. "You humiliated yourself. I just made sure everyone saw the truth." Diane turned to me, her face streaked with tears. "How long have you known?" "A week," I admitted. "I found out by accident. But I couldn't just keep this to myself." "You deserve to know, Diane." Ashley grabbed her purse, her hands fumbling as she tried to maintain some semblance of control. "This is ridiculous. I'm leaving." "Not so fast," I said, pulling out my phone. "Before you go, I think you should know this conversation is being recorded, just like the evidence I've already sent to my lawyer. Don't think for a second you're walking away from this unscathed." Ashley froze, her eyes wide. "You wouldn't." "Oh, I already have," I said, my voice ice cold. Mark finally spoke, his voice hoarse. "Diane, I'm so. Don't you dare say you're sorry." Diane spat, pointing a shaking finger at him. "You ruined everything. You've betrayed me in the worst way possible. Get out of my house." "Diane, please." "Now." Mark stood, his shoulders slumped in defeat, and walked out of the room without another word. Ashley hesitated, glancing between me and Diane. "Mom, Get out," Diane said, her voice hollow. "Don't come back." Ashley's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't argue. She grabbed her purse and ran out the door, leaving Diane and me in the wreckage of what had been a family. Diane sank into her chair, her face buried in her hands. "How could they do this?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. I didn't have an answer, but I wasn't finished with Ashley and Mark yet. The drive home with Ashley was unbearable. The air between us was thick with silence, broken only by her shaky breaths. She stared out the window, her hands clenched into fists on her lap. I refused to speak first, and she clearly didn't know what to say. When we pulled into the driveway, she finally broke the silence. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" she hissed, her voice trembling with anger. "Me?" I asked, my tone sharp. "I'm not the one who destroyed this marriage, Ashley. You did that the moment you climbed into bed with your stepfather." She flinched, her face contorting with anger and shame. You didn't have to humiliate me in front of my mom. You could have kept this private. I let out a bitter laugh. Private? Like the private lies you've been feeding me for months? Like the private betrayal you thought I'd never find out about? Her face turned red as she opened the car door and slammed it shut, storming into the house. I followed her, my anger simmering just beneath the surface. You think I'm the villain here? I demanded as she threw her purse onto the couch. You think I'm the problem? You've been screwing Mark behind my back. How do you even justify that in your head? Ashley whirled around, her eyes blazing. You don't understand. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. Then how was it supposed to happen, Ashley? Enlighten me. She hesitated, her mouth opening and closing like she was searching for the right words. It wasn't about you, she finally said, her voice quieter. Oh, that makes it so much better, I said sarcastically. You betrayed me, lied to your mom, and slept with her husband. But hey, at least it wasn't about me. Tears welled up in her eyes, but I had no sympathy left for her. She sat down heavily on the couch, burying her face in her hands. I didn't mean for it to go this far, she mumbled. I folded my arms, glaring at her. You didn't mean for it to go this far? What does that even mean? You didn't mean to get caught. She looked up at me, her face streaked with tears. I don't expect you to understand. It just happened. Mark, Don't, I said, cutting her off. Don't you dare try to pin this on him. You're a grown woman, Ashley. You made your choices, and now you're going to face the consequences. She didn't respond, her shoulders shaking as she cried silently. Part of me wanted to feel sorry for her, but the anger and betrayal were too strong. I've already contacted a lawyer, I said, my voice cold. The divorce papers will be ready by the end of the week. I'll be moving out tomorrow. Her head snapped up, panic flashing across her face. Wait, what? You can't just leave like this. We can fix this. Please, let's talk about it. Fix this, I repeated, my voice rising. There's no fixing this, Ashley. You destroyed everything. You made your choice, and now I'm making mine. She reached for me, but I stepped back. The sight of her made my stomach turn. I'll pack my things tonight, I said, turning toward the stairs. Don't try to stop me. As I walked away, her sobs echoed through the house. But I didn't look back. This wasn't the end of my revenge. Far from it. Mark and Ashley thought they could walk away from this unscathed. They were about to learn just how wrong they were. I spent the night in the guest room, the door locked as I packed my things. Ashley knocked once, begging me to talk, but I ignored her. My mind wasn't on her anymore, it was on Mark. The man had slithered his way into my life, pretending to be a supportive father figure to Ashley and a friendly in-law to me. And all the while, he was sneaking around behind Diane's back, destroying his family and mine. If I wanted true justice, I needed to make sure Mark's life fell apart just as thoroughly as he'd ruined mine. The next morning, I finalized my plan. Diane deserved to know the full extent of Mark's betrayal, and I wanted her to have something tangible to confront him with. I prepared another folder of evidence, more comprehensive than the one I'd shown her at dinner. It included financial records, proof of Ashley and Mark's meetings, and the camera footage from our house. But my plan didn't stop with Diane. Mark was well respected in the community. He owned a mid-sized contracting business, and his reputation for being a family man was one of the reasons he got so much work. I intended to take that reputation and burn it to the ground. First, I called Diane. Diane, I know last night was overwhelming, I began. She sighed heavily on the other end of the line. That's an understatement. I'm sorry for how I handled things, I said, softening my tone. But I wanted to make sure you had everything you need. There's more you deserve to know. I heard the hesitation in her voice. More? Yes, I said firmly. I've put together everything I've found. I'll drop it off this afternoon. Diane agreed reluctantly, her voice tinged with exhaustion. I don't know how I'll face him again. Don't worry, I said. You won't have to. By the time I'm done, he'll be too busy trying to salvage his life. My next call was to a local journalist who specialized in community scandals. I'd read their exposés before: messy divorces, embezzlement, and corruption. This would be right up their alley. "Hi, is this Sarah?" I asked when she picked up. "Yes. Who's this?" I introduced myself and gave her a brief overview of the situation. "I have proof of infidelity, financial fraud, and misconduct involving a prominent local businessman. Are you interested?" "Very," she said, her voice perking up. "Send me what you've got." I emailed her a copy of the evidence and hung up, feeling a twisted sense of satisfaction. Mark wouldn't just lose his family. He'd lose the respect of everyone who thought he was a good man. Later that afternoon, I dropped off the folder at Diane's house. She opened the door, her face pale and drawn. "Thank you," she murmured, taking the folder with shaking hands. "I'm sorry you have to go through this," I said sincerely. "But you deserve to know the truth." Diane nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "I don't know what I'll do without him." "You'll figure it out," I said gently. "You're stronger than you think." As I walked back to my car, I felt a flicker of pity for Diane, but the thought of Mark's betrayal snuffed it out. He'd dug his own grave, and I was just making sure he fell into it. By the time I got home, my phone was buzzing with updates. The journalist had already called me back, eager to publish the story. Mark thought he could sneak around and face no consequences. He was about to learn what it felt like to have his entire world crumble. Monday morning began with a storm. Not from the sky, but in the inboxes and phones of everyone in our small town. The journalist I'd contacted, Sarah, had worked faster than I expected. Her article hit the news site at 6 a.m., and by the time I was pouring my coffee, the fallout was already in full swing. The headline read, "Prominent local businessman's double life. Infidelity and financial misconduct exposed." The article laid everything bare. Mark's affair with his stepdaughter, the financial improprieties he'd hidden in plain sight, and even the sordid details about the hotel rendezvous. Sarah had taken the evidence I'd given her and painted a damning picture of Mark as a hypocrite, a liar, and a man unworthy of his community's trust. I scrolled through the comments section, smirking at the outrage pouring in. People who'd known Mark for years were disgusted, furious. Some questioned if Diane had known. Others speculated on how long the affair had been going on. Ashley texted me before 8 a.m. "Ashley, what the hell did you do?" Me told the truth. "Isn't that what you've been avoiding?" "Ashley, you've ruined everything. This isn't just about us anymore." "Me, you ruined us the moment you let Mark into your bed. I'm just making sure you both reap what you've sown." She didn't reply. By noon, the phone calls started. Mutual friends, co-workers, even some of Ashley's relatives reached out, trying to piece together the scandal. I ignored most of them, letting the voicemail handle the fallout. The real satisfaction came when I heard from Diane. She called me just after lunch, her voice steady but colder than I'd ever heard it. "He's gone," she said bluntly. "What do you mean?" "I threw him out this morning," she continued. "After the article came out, he came crawling to me, begging for forgiveness. Said it was all a mistake, that he was weak." Her voice cracked with anger. "I told him to pack his things and leave." "Good," I said simply. "But he's blaming you for everything," she added. "He's saying you're the reason his life is falling apart." I laughed bitterly. "Of course he is. That's what cowards do. They blame everyone else for their mistakes." Diane hesitated. I'm sorry, for whatever it's worth, for what Ashley did to you, for what Mark did to all of us. It's not your fault," I said, softening my tone. "You didn't ask for this." By the time I hung up, I knew Mark was finished. Diane kicking him out was the final nail in his coffin. But there was one more move to make. That evening, I walked into Mark's office building, a thick envelope in hand. His secretary looked up, startled, as I approached her desk. "I need to see Mark," I said, my voice firm. "He's not available right now," she stammered, clearly flustered by the day's events. "Fine. Then give him this." I dropped the envelope onto her desk and walked out without another word. Inside the envelope was the final piece of my revenge. A letter detailing every shred of evidence I hadn't already exposed. Photos, receipts, timelines, all organized neatly, with a note at the end that read, "You thought you could hide. You thought you'd get away with it. Now everyone knows who you really are." As I drove home, a sense of grim satisfaction settled over me. Mark had destroyed my marriage, shattered Diane's trust, and dragged everyone around him into his mess. But now the world saw him for what he truly was. Ashley's silence since that morning was telling. She knew there was no coming back from this. And as for me, I was just getting started. 2 days after the article went viral, Ashley showed up at my new apartment. I hadn't given her the address, but I wasn't surprised she'd found it. She stood in the doorway, her makeup smeared, her eyes red from crying. "Please," she whispered, "let me in." I stepped aside, arms crossed as she walked in, looking around at the sparse furniture. "You ruined my life," she said, her voice shaking. "No," I said calmly. "You ruined it." Tears streamed down her face as she tried to explain. "I didn't mean for it to happen. Mark, he manipulated me." I scoffed. "Stop blaming him. You're an adult, Ashley. You made your choices." She collapsed onto the couch, sobbing. "What do I do now?" "That's not my problem," I said coldly. "You're on your own." She looked up at me, desperate. "Can we fix this?"
Ist daher, unflinching. No.
"And don't come here again." The next morning, I got a call from an unknown number. Reluctantly, I answered. "Hey, it's Mark." His voice was low, defeated. I almost hung up but decided to let him squirm. "What do you want?" "You need to stop this," he said, his words rushed. "The article, the rumors, it's destroying my business. I'll lose everything." I smirked, though he couldn't see it. "Good. You deserve to." "Please," he begged. "I'll do anything. Just let me fix this." "There's nothing to fix," I said coldly. "Enjoy the fallout, Mark." I hung up, satisfied. That evening, Diane called me again. Her voice was heavy with exhaustion. "I found something," she said quietly. "Mark had a separate bank account. I went through it." "What did you find?" I asked, intrigued. "Payments," she replied. "To Ashley. Thousands of dollars over the past year." I clenched the phone tighter. "So, he was paying her?" "Yes," Diane said, her voice breaking. "I don't know what hurts more, the affair or knowing he treated her like that." I let the silence linger. There were no words to soften a betrayal like this. The payments Diane discovered added fuel to the fire. I forwarded the details to Sarah, the journalist. Within hours, an updated article was live. Affair Fund. Hidden payments reveal more about local scandal. The public's outrage reached a fever pitch. Mark's business partners began distancing themselves, and clients canceled contracts. Diane called me in tears, saying neighbors were whispering every time she left the house. "Let them talk," I told her. The truth needed to come out. Ashley didn't reach out again. She knew there was no coming back from this. Late one night, I received a text from an unknown number. "You've destroyed me. I hope you're happy." I knew it was Mark. He'd lost his home, his business, and any shred of respect he once had. Diane had filed for divorce, and the community had turned its back on him. I deleted the message without responding. He wanted sympathy, but I had none left to give. Meanwhile, Diane called to let me know she'd served him with papers. "I'm done with him," she said firmly. "He deserves everything coming his way." I couldn't agree more. A week later, I heard through mutual friends that Ashley had left town. No goodbye, no explanation. She just vanished. "She's staying with some friend in another state," one friend told me. "She's embarrassed, I think." Embarrassed wasn't enough. She'd wrecked lives and thought she could simply run from the consequences. Diane, however, stayed. She was rebuilding her life piece by piece, vowing to never let anyone take advantage of her again. "She's your problem now," Diane said of Ashley. "She's no problem of mine," I replied coldly. Ashley was nothing more than a ghost to me now. With Ashley gone and Mark's life in shambles, the storm finally settled. Diane and I stayed in touch, both finding solace in our shared pain. She sold the house and moved to a smaller place, eager for a fresh start. As for me, I finalized the divorce and moved forward with my life. The revenge had been satisfying, but it didn't erase the scars. Still, I found peace knowing they'd both paid for what they'd done. One night, Diane called me unexpectedly. "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything." I smiled faintly, staring out at the night sky. "We survived, Diane. That's what matters." And with that, I let go of the past, ready to begin again.